The tragedy of the occurrence at a Texas track meet have recently become the center stage topic in the discussions involving race relations within the United States. This incident is serving as a watershed moment in American history, redefining the dynamics of the relationships between Blacks and whites, while opening up the reality of the chasm that sits between us ideologically. It is clear that white people have never accepted the autonomy of Black people and our right to draw the line when it comes to our personal space and personal safety. However, what's most troubling is the response to the still unfolding story of two white boys approaching a Black child at a sporting event, resulting in the tragic loss of life. The vilification of the Defense Against Assault and Intrusion into the personal space of a Black child involved in this incident, and the response coming from white people in this country is truly a sight to behold. The hatred emanating from these racist, hate-filled individuals is flooding the social media landscape, the dam bursting full of vitriol and revenge, pouring itself out and into the open, decimating the pretense that had built itself into false being. Negroes knew these beings were like this, holding within themselves the sentiment of white supremacy and entitlement, ignoring the misstep of two known white bullies approaching one of our children and imposing their unwanted presence into his personal space. After being warned to not approach him and having no other choice when faced with two 200-pound children accustomed to throwing their weight around, the Black child had no choice but to defend himself, and did so effectively, resulting in the loss of one of the lives of the aggressors. Now we hear a chorus of white indignity and anger at the reaction to being threatened, assaulted, and verbally abused, with the expectation that the victim should endure the imposition of entitled whiteness into his orbit and not take the steps needed to maintain his own safety. One can only surmise that if the roles were reversed and it had been a white child being bullied by two Black children with the result of a life being taken, white people in this country would be singing a different tune, one of indifference regarding that loss of life, and praising that child for being so prudent in defending his life despite the tragic outcome. It appears whiteness knows no bounds in justifying their actions that result in consequence. When it comes to white life in this country, no matter what the circumstances, it is highly valued above all other life, even when the steps taken in losing that life are the fault of the white being that chooses to put it at risk with their miscalculated and reckless actions. They train their children and then send them out into the world with a sense of entitlement, mechanizing that attitude, giving full permission for them to impose their imagined authority over all others who they consider beneath them. The record of these instances are clear in our view and historically documented, as one of them decided to arm himself and go to an area where he was not invited and exercised authority he did not have, resulting in shooting two people. If they only sent their children out into the world with the message to mind their business and keep to themselves and not involve and impose their imagined and elsewise non-existent authority onto others, then their children would be as equally safe as ours should be. This circumstance is telling in its clear-cut order of events. A Black child was in the presence of two white children, that initiated contact and determined that they were the authority and could tell another child where they could sit. The rules were clear in that each had rightful presence to be where they were, and no one had the authority to tell anyone where to sit. The possession of a knife in itself is not a crime, and the utilization of that tool in defending oneself is not criminal. Yet the putrid fomentation of criminalizing that possession by the black child coming from the mouths of white people in this country is an offense to all that is decent and fair. They truly expected the black child to be accepting of the presence of two bullies in his space and wanted him to acquiesce or fight on unfair terms, a two against one scenario in which he would most certainly be the loser. Yet, in defending himself, utilizing all that he had to maintain his safety, the tragic result being the loss of life, one would come to conclude that had these two white children remained in their place and not asserted their feigned authority, one of them would still be alive today. So much has been said regarding the upbringing of the black child, who, for all intents and purposes, has no history or record of any kind of aggression or criminality. In fact, the opposite is true, in there being a news article praising this child for his saving a life during a drowning. Perspective being associated with positioning, it might be easy to misconstrue the events and bend them to accuse the black child of overreacting. However, what cause would any of us have in measuring out our response to such circumstances? They intrude and impose their whiteness on black people in this country on a daily basis, expecting us to yield to that imposition. And when one of us stands firm to determine that we will not be victims of white supremacy on any given day, then suddenly they're vilified and criminalized and told that they have no right to defend themselves against imposed whiteness. The autonomy of blackness must be protected at all costs. And if that costs lives, then it is a cost to be paid tragically, yet expectedly. Otherwise, we continue in marginalizing and mitigating the imposition of white people upon black people. Our message is a simple one. Mind your goddamned business and keep your goddamned hands to your white selves from now on. This seems to be the order of the day and the lesson to be learned from this tragic experience. Teach your children that it is not their right to be in the faces and the orbit and the spaces of others in any respect. If that can't be accomplished, then maintain a proper distance and keep yourselves to yourselves so that this is not a repeated action. Protect your children from the consequences of their actions by instructing them on how to act in the first place.